guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Same Kitchen. My name's Sam Lin. I am just an ordinary home cook who's really passionate about sustainability and save money by making things at home, and hopefully I can help you guys do the same in your own kitchen as well. This week's recipe is another recipe of the 69 series. One of the local groceries that I visit frequently has got cabbage on special a couple weeks ago, and yes, you guessed it, for 69 cents per cabbage, which is incredibly cheap. So I thought I'd make this recipe and share it with you guys. There are a lot of advantages when it comes to buying food on special. When food goes on special, it's either it's going off or the supply has increased and the food is in season, so that's why it's cheap. So as a consumer, really try to take advantage of that. That can greatly help with your food budgeting. So I often look at it as like buying food on special is just so similar to investing. When you know the intrinsic value of what you're buying, when the price dip, you buy the dip. So that's when food goes on special. When it comes to investing, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You have to do your homework to understand what the value of the companies are and do your analysis. But fundamentally, it's the same thing. You're buying something that is lower than the market price. So buy the dip, that's how you take advantage of that. Yeah, so coming back to cabbage. Cabbage, this week I'm going to show you how I make sauerkraut out of cabbage. Sauerkraut is a fermented product, and the method I'm going to be using is once again lacto fermentation. When it comes to lacto fermentation, it's really 2% salt to the actual ingredient that you are fermenting. So the bacteria is going to eat away the carb and the sugar within our cabbage and then be creating carbon dioxide and then creating a really nice acidic flavor to our food. It not only makes it really delicious and also preserve your food and make it last very long time. So that's one really great way to use your cabbage when it's cheap. So make a bulk amount of sauerkraut. You can put it into your sandwich, or it's a great companion with sausages or barbecues, all that kind of great stuff. And on top of that, it's really good for your gut as well, because it's a fermented product and it's got all of the goodness in it. So without further ado, let's get cooking.
To make sauerkraut, we just need two very basic ingredients. First thing we'll need is cabbage. Here, I've got a sugarloaf cabbage, but normal green cabbage or red cabbage works just as well. Second ingredient we'll need is salt to create our lacto fermentation. Next, we'll need a jar to store our sauerkraut, a big mixing bowl, and as always, we'll be working with a scale to help us measure out our 2% salt we'll need for the recipe. Good luck trying to find out what 2% of 3 cups of cabbage is in salt. This recipe is so easy to do with just 2 ingredients. No fancy equipment needed and no skills required whatsoever. There's literally no excuse to buy jarred sauerkraut anymore after learning about this recipe. We'll put all these aside and get started. Grab a chopping board and we'll cut up our cabbage. Contrary to what most people think about sharp knives being dangerous, it's a lot safer to work with a sharp knife than a dull knife. A dull knife tends to slip when it's unable to cut into the food. When knives slip, your fingers usually become the victim. So always sharpen your knife. After all that, if you still don't agree, that is okay. Only sharp people can appreciate them. Set our scale and mixing bowl up so we can weigh out the exact amount of cabbage to salt. Start by cutting the cabbage in half the long side. Once cut open, in the cross section of the sugar loaf, you can see right in the middle of it, there's the cabbage core. The core is quite dense and would have a different texture compared to the leaves, so we want to cut out the cabbage core. Don't toss the core out, as the fermented core can add some really nice flavor when it comes to making stock. Stick the knife in and kind of just wedge the core out. Get rid of the bottom of the core, as it's more of the stem kind of texture and wouldn't be too nice to eat. Once decored, we'll cut our cabbage into a 0.5 centimeter slaw across the short side. By giving it a bit of a width, we can make sure that the sauerkraut gets some really nice crunch to it after being fermented. I wouldn't recommend using a mandolin, as the sauerkraut will be too fine and will lose all of the texture. Chuck the cut up cabbage in our mixing bowl and we'll do the same to the other half of the cabbage. Once all of the cabbage is cut up, we can put the knife and the cutting board aside and start working on the cabbage. My cut up cabbage weighs about 671 grams, To achieve 2% salt, we'll just multiply 671 by 0.02, which gives us 13.42 grams of salt. Once we got our incredibly difficult math problem worked out, we'll add our 13.42 grams of salt to our cabbage. Do a bit of a sprinkle, and we'll mix the salt through our cabbage until it's fully combined. Once the salt is evenly distributed, start working the salt into your cabbage by gently pressing the cabbage in like you're working a dough. Give it 3 to 5 minutes and your cabbage should start sweating like what you can see on the screen. This will help the salt penetrate through our cabbage and speed up the process a bit. Don't worry that you'll bruise the cabbage, that's the whole point. Once the cabbage looks like this, it's ready to be jarred up. Grab a clean jar and we want to put all of our cabbage in. Make sure your jar is clean, you're nasty. You don't want weird fungus growing in your sauerkraut. Get all of the cabbage in and we want to pack it in really tightly. Press it down with your fingers and we want to make sure you squeeze all of the air out of the cabbage. One key part of lacto fermentation is that to ensure the food is fully submerged in brine. The microbial development under the brine is anaerobic lactic acid bacteria, which requires no air or oxygen to make it work. Getting rid of the air in our sauerkraut will help minimize other unexpected fungus or bacteria developing. The more you press it down, you'll start seeing the kraut juice coming through and covering it in brine. You can also use a rolling pin or whatever tool you can find to press it down. Final step before we can put it away is to cover the top of the kraut with a clean plastic wrap. This is to make sure the kraut is submerged in the liquid. If you can find some weight to put on top of it, even better. Otherwise, give your kraut a press every other day to make sure it's still submerged. Put the lid on loosely. The fermentation will be creating carbon dioxide, so make sure that you've got room for the air to escape. And as always, make sure you label your food and date it so you know when it was made. How do you spell sauerkraut again? Put the label on and we'll let it ferment for 1 to 2 weeks. Best way to tell whether or not it's ready is by tasting your food. Depending on the time of the year, temperature and climate, your kraut will ferment at different rate. I put mine away in the fridge at around the 10th day mark. Once the ferment is put in the fridge, the fermentation process will slow down dramatically and the flavour will stay at where it is, so definitely taste your food so you can make sure it's the flavour that you want before putting it away. So now the sauerkraut is nice and fermented, we'll make a sandwich to try it out. I've got some homemade sourdough and we'll cut up some tasty cheese to go with it. To go in the sandwich, I've got some brisket that I cooked the other day. Corned beef also goes really nicely with sauerkraut too. Got our brisket on, our sauerkraut on. Be generous. Our cheese on, and last but not the least, our homemade mustard. Go check out the mustard recipe in the description section if you haven't already. Stove on, pan on medium heat, sandwich in, and like to put a really heavy lid on top to make sure that the sandwich gets nice and toasted. Flip the sandwich over when the bottom is golden brown. Gotta love some cheese action here. Sandwich out. And check out the cross section. The cost breakdown is rather simple today. 1 cabbage at 69 cents. 13.42 grams of salt, I'm saying $0 so I can keep the recipe at the magic number. 671 grams of sauerkraut costed us 69 cents to make. Store-bought sauerkraut is at least 4 to 5 times of the price.
Alright, and there we have it. That's our sauerkraut. It's so easy to make and really just let the time do its thing. It will turn your cabbage into some really delicious pickle-ish kind of vegetable and it lasts forever in your fridge. Obviously taste it throughout the whole process and find out what works best for you, what kind of flavor you prefer. Once it reaches to the right amount of acidity and sourness, put it in the fridge and it will last forever. I'm gonna dig in. The crunchiness of the sauerkraut and the acidity really complements the brisket and then just works so well in a sandwich. And on top of that, it's our homemade mustard, such a killer combination and perfect for lunch really. Sauerkraut is so versatile. I would put it in a sandwich any day. It's so cheap, it's so easy to make, and it lasts forever. And on top of that, it's fermented, so it's good for your guts as well. If you're still watching at this point, I really appreciate your support. Thank you very, very much. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I put out a new video on a weekly basis. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.